My presentation is on the article Ancient Rome and the Pirates. This article starts off by introducing Greek historian and geographer Strabo. In 1480, Strabo sets the stage for the public opinion of the Mediterranean and the pirates who inhabit it. He said that the world is divided into two parts. The better part was that which was under Roman control, while the rest of the world was uncivilized and barbaric, whose people practiced piracy. The Roman side had order and its people were prosperous, and they could peacefully sail with the purpose of trading across the sea. The other side was home to pirates who would steal, murder, and kidnap from passing ships who posed no threat. These stable conditions at sea were a relatively new development at the time that Strabo was writing this. Before this, the Romans saw the pirates as a serious problem to their trade and the safety of their coastal cities. The biggest problem was for the merchants, though, since they faced not only the economic hazard, but it was also common for pirates to just outright kill everyone on board or sell them as slaves. Piracy really became a big problem when groups of pirate ships would come together to raid coastal cities all around the Mediterranean, especially because there wasn't any one stable political power who would go up against the pirates. These attacks were hard to predict and defend against, which ended up making the raids much more lucrative than just robbing ships. There were even communities who welcomed and housed pirates because of all the money, luxury goods, basic commodities, and slaves that they brought, which boosted the community's economy. On the outside, the Romans and Greeks made it out that they were fighting the pirates for the greater good of the people. The term pirate came as a political advantage evidenced by the fact that some Roman and Greek city-states would claim certain areas as home to pirates just as an excuse for imperialism. At the start of the 2nd century BC, the Romans weren't the biggest maritime power. This was held by the independent state of Rhodes, which heavily depended on trade from ships. This meant that they had an incentive to fight off the pirates, specifically the Cretans. But the Rhodians had limited resources, and by the end of the 2nd century BC, Rome was the leading maritime power in the Mediterranean. This led the Romans to their long rule over the Mediterranean and building up their navy for the wars that they would fight overseas. For the Romans, a lot of the times the pirates were just a cover up to take more land, and the real pirates that clashed with the Romans would often just be another annoyance and get in the way of the real plans of overthrowing another community. As the Romans do, they got power hungry and wanted to lead a new expedition. To do this, they appointed Marcus Antonius the Orator to lead the operation. He was in charge of taking over the area of southern Turkey known as Cilicia. The Cilicians had a reputation for piracy since they were recruited as allies around 140 BC by Diodotus Tryphon, a pretender to the Syrian throne. They were known to plunder the coastal communities and shipping off the eastern Mediterranean. After spending a year in office in 103 BC, Marcus was assigned in charge of the war against the Cilicians for the next year. He wanted to do this because if he succeeded, he would be considered for the consulship, which is Rome's highest magistracy. Marcus made an army mainly consisting of their Greek allies, but specifically the Rhodians. There isn't any documentation of the actual campaign, but we know he succeeded in taking out multiple pirate bases along the coast of southern Turkey. After his successful campaign, he did get elected to consulship in 99 BC. The Mithridates were a long-standing enemy of the Romans in which they fought a series of wars against each other from 89 to 63 BC. Pontus, the king of the Mithridates, even took control of Anatolia and some parts of mainland Greece at one point. The Mithridates were also accused by the Romans of using pirates during wars. In fact, they did actually hire Cretan and Cilician mercenaries to help them fight. The Cretans were actually supposed to be cleared of charges by the Romans and declared as allies, but then an ambitious politician called Lentus Spinther forced the Senate to declare war on the Cretans. The Romans weren't trying to suppress piracy anymore. They just wanted the massive amounts of loot and the status they would get from defeating the great Cretan pirates. Along with defeating the Cretans, they would also gain control of Crete, which they saw as a profitable addition to their empire. Around the 70s and 60s BC, kidnappings were still a relatively common occurrence in the Mediterranean. One day in late 75 or early 74 BC, a group of pirates decided to kidnap a young, aspiring Roman aristocrat. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and he was held for ransom for around 40 days until it was finally paid. After being let go, Caesar went to find the kidnappers, and once he did, he went to find Juncus, the social governor of where he was, to have him press charges. Unfortunately for Caesar, Juncus didn't care about what happened to the pirates. All he wanted to know was what happened to the loot that the pirates were carrying. Instead of setting up an execution through the state, Juncus just made Caesar set the pirates' execution up himself. This is one thing that really made Caesar dislike pirates, which is visible in the later parts of his life. Pirate attacks continued growing even larger along with the Roman economy in their 60s BC. Now, this time, a man known as Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, aka Pompey, was put in charge of fixing the pirate problem that Rome had once and for all. He was given massive amounts of resources and 3 years to finish it. This is because piracy was becoming a serious problem for local communities in 67 BC. After the pirates had attacked the cities along the Tiber River, they realized that these were easy pickings for them, so they had to act now before the pirates would cause even more damage. After being given this role, it ended up boosting Pompey's career so much that a Greek philosopher, Plutarch, even wrote a biography for him which contained many speeches that Pompey did. Pompey knew he had to do something fast, because if some of the cities got hit with a pirate raid, whilst already being low on grain, this would cause a massive crisis inside the cities because people wouldn't be able to provide the food for themselves. This is why Pompey's first priority was securing proper grain supplies. After this, Pompey went on to fight many places, most being pirate bases and communities along the coast of Cilicia. After Pompey's successful campaign, this finally seemed to stop most commercial piracy that the coastal cities along the Mediterranean would encounter. Now, pirates weren't completely gone, but they found trade to be difficult since the Romans took over many of the trading cities that pirates would use. The last rise in popularity for piracy came around the 30s BC, where many pieces of literature would mention pirates and piracy. Besides this literary work, piracy in the Mediterranean never saw the scale of how it was in the 70s to 60s BC.